And then I'm going to go to live on Facebook. So let me do this. And it's going to pull up Facebook for me. And then I'm going to say that I want to go into my group. So here we go. And I'm going to do Angie's TR study group. And I'm going to hit next. And then we'll just pull it up. So it's going to live stream for us on there. But I'm doing the recording too for everybody. But I just want to see if we capture a couple of people, because I know lots wanted to come on. So we should get a lot on. It's just, it's an odd time of the night, but it's my time. So we're almost there, Dan. It's just doing the little circle thing. So I'll tell you how I met Dan. How about that?
There you go.
I was at Matrix, and across the room, this guy stood up, and
which Matrix is one of Bob's big events, Bob Proctor's big events.
And so Dan stood up and said something, and I just started bawling because of what he was talking about. And I'm not really sure what happened, but I do remember, yes, I am recording it. Do your video thing. Yes. And I just remember that he and we were like, I felt like magnets. That's how I felt, because I was just really attracted, Dan, right away to talk with them. And I lost you, Dan. Where did you go? There you go. And I just remember just being really excited to talk with you. And then you and I chatted a little bit, and I just remember it was like magic. And I just remember I loved your mind and how you thought about things. And then I found out what you did, and all of a sudden I got intimidated. So that's how I met Dan. So I'm going to it's really a great pleasure to introduce you, because you've come on a couple of times. It's been a while, but I remember this was when people had the biggest growth of understanding, was when you came on and simplified it. So
that's good. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So, and it helped me have better language to talk. And so we'll just let you jump right into quantum physics for us. Do a quantum physics for people who don't know. How about that?
And my microphone sounds okay?
Totally perfect.
Okay, good, because it's a little ways off to the side here.
No, it's good.
Tommy, I know, could get it all dialed in for me real quick, but I just have it set up. So if it's working, it's working. That's great. And where do you want to start, Angie?
What made you get into doing this kind of work and understanding the mind? How did you move from what you were doing in physics to move into understanding the mind and kind of going into this direction?
Wow, that's a big topic to start.
Let's jump right in.
Well, I have a background in learning, and I've always loved learning. The physics came in just because I found it really challenging. I had actually, when I was in my second year of college, I was a physics student, but I was also a writing student. I was taking English and physics and a bunch of other stuff. But my physics instructor said, you're pretty good at this. You should maybe think about going into teaching. And I said, okay, that sounds like fun. And within a week, my English professor said, you're really good at English and writing. You should go into teaching. And I said, okay. And ended up having a double major when I graduated in physics and English, which is kind of a right brain, left brain thing. But I went from there into teaching, taught for a total of about, I think, 17 years, mostly teaching physics, chemistry, astronomy, biology, those kinds of things, but also taught honors English to juniors that were preparing for their SAT exams, and ended up having a great time with it. but in the course of studying physics, I got really interested in a couple areas. One was optics, and the other was what they at that time called modern physics. They hadn't gotten to the point of calling anything quantum at that point.
Mm-hmm.
There was there was classical mechanics and there was quantum mechanics. And the classical mechanics is force and generally force and energy and electricity and those kinds of things. And quantum physics I found was really fascinating because I'd taken one semester of the beginning of quantum physics, which was what they called Einsteinian relativity, which had to do with gravity and things moving at high speeds, which we don't really need to talk about. But then it went from there into this area, which was this was the early 1970s. So quantum mechanics was known to exist, but not a whole lot was really known about defining it well, about what happens. They knew that when you get down to the atom, which we've all been taught is a solid ball, kind of like a marble, with little teeny rice grains circling around it, which was a good model for describing chemical reactions and a good model for describing what happens in physics in the force and electricity and that kind of thing. But it wasn't an accurate model, and they knew it wasn't an accurate model because the atom was at that point was believed to be about 99.9 with several nines after it percent empty space. And they know today that that's not true. That it turns out the best description of the atom in terms of space is that the nucleus of the atom we know is a massive part of the atom, someplace toward the center, but the electrons, it turns out, are not really particles. They're not really matter as we think of it. They're today they're called what they call point charges. All they are is an electric charge that takes up no volume and takes up no space, and it doesn't have any weight to it. It's just electrical energy, and that became a very difficult thing for everybody to get their mind around. How can it be that the electron is just an electric charge? It doesn't take up any space. It doesn't have any volume. And not only that, you can't tell exactly where it's going to be at any given instant. In fact, if somebody looks to see where an electron is, and there were multiple experiments that were done to verify it, it turns out that the electron kind of vanishes and then reappears, but not in the same place that it vanished. And there was no way to predict exactly where it was going to be. And there was a whole principle called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle that described that mathematically. But it said that the electron is an elusive particle. And then they started looking at the nucleus, which is the far and away the heavier part of the atom in terms of its mass, and they found out, kind of to their surprise, but many people were expecting it, that the nucleus is actually empty space also. Mm-hmm. It has different electrical properties, and it has what's called a rest mass, but it's not really matter as we think of it. When we think of a solid like this desk here, we call this a solid because we can sense it with our eyes. We can touch it. We can knock on it. We have a sense that there's something there. But in reality, if you look at it on a very small scale, it's just energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it very difficult to describe, well, what have we been doing for all these years? This isn't COVID. This is just a little thing in my throat.
We're not going to catch it. We're
We're
far
not
away.
going to catch it. Yeah. I've known people to catch things over the telephone,
Yeah.
so I'm not so sure. But it turns out that that what we think of as matter is really just energy in a specific form, and Bob talks about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I've heard him speak, he's talked about the solids, liquids, and gases, and how they're all just different forms of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very true. But more recently, starting in the 70s, but then verified up until just a few years ago, it's still verified, but they kind of stopped repeating the experiment, is a series of experiments that were done looking at specifically at electrons and at protons, at what they call the subatomic particles, the particles that make up the atom. And bits of matter like electrons have some material properties besides electric charge. They also have something called spin, which is really kind of like if you think of a top spinning, it's sort of like a top. Hmm. And in some cases, when they were studying electrons, they saw that some electrons seemed to travel in pairs. And one electron would be spinning one direction, and the other electron would be spinning in the opposite direction. And that made sense because nature loves to keep everything balanced. And so they had some experiments done on electron spin, and they said, well, these two seem to be together, and they called it entanglement. They seem to be connected. And when they separated those two electrons and through some electric fields, they caused the spin on one electron to reverse. They noticed that the other one, which wasn't being manipulated at all, also reversed. So the balance was maintained. When they looked at it more closely, it looked like when they made the first one change its spin, the other one did it not after a little while, it did it instantaneously. So that led them to think, well, there's some kind of information that's being transferred between the first electron and the second electron. Let's see how fast that information is traveling. So they separated them a little bit further and a little bit further. And I can't reach out too far because I'll go off the screen here. But eventually they separated them to the point where they wanted to verify that the information was traveling at the speed of light, which is to be expected because light from stars and light from car headlights and city lights and all that travels at the speed of light and carries information. So it's made sense to do that. But they found that when they got the electrons separated to the point where they could actually measure the speed that it traveled, it was still instantaneous. Mm-hmm. And they knew that if light was traveling across there, it would take light a measurable time to travel that distance. But that wasn't the case. And they repeated the experiment, not just in one lab, but hundreds of labs around the world. And they found the same results. And the only way they could describe that was that somehow this information is being transferred faster than the speed of light. Mm-hmm. Which seems to contradict all of the rules of special relativity that says nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. But if you look at the rule itself, it says no physical object can travel faster than the speed of light. And something like the information that's being transferred is, they said, it can't be a physical transfer, a transfer of physical material. It has to be just a transfer of pure energy.
Mhm.
And that energy, because it's instantaneous, can't be particulate or wave it can't be like a water wave or a sound wave or something like that. It's more like thought. And when they extrapolate those results, it says that it doesn't matter how far apart the electrons are taken, and of course they can't prove that because they can't get out to the ends of the universe, but they say if you take those two electrons and separate them to opposite ends of the universe and switch one, the other one will switch instantaneously.
Mhm.
The most interesting thing more recently is that they found that in some cases, when they went to switch it, just the intention of switching it caused the other one to switch first,
So interesting.
which is pretty mind-boggling.
Mhm.
How can that information travel? But then there are all kinds of experiments that have been done on intention with actual thought, where things change before the actual where what would be the result happens before the effect because of intention. And we could go into the whole thing of where, how the whole idea of quantum physics got started, because quantum is used in all kinds of quantum leaps and there's even a quantum car that's called, I don't know who makes it, but there's a car called a quantum. But quantum just means a quantity, and it says that energy comes in little packets called quanta, and that quantum mechanics is the study of energy of very small objects. And it turns out when you get down to a certain level, all objects are just energy.
So if you had to, why is that significant in your life? Because can we talk about what happened to you when you were younger? I don't know if those are related or
A
not.
lot of things that happened to me when I was younger. Which thing are we talking about?
About one day when you had the idea about a car.
Yeah, actually, it was about an engine for a car,
Okay.
and I've learned since that I think it does have something to do with quantum energy or quantum physics.
Before you knew it.
Yeah, I didn't know. I was a physics student in
Yes.
up on the Oregon coast going to a community college, the same physics class where the professor thought I should teach physics. A day just about this time of the year, middle of April in 1971, so it was a few years ago. And driving to work, driving to school, it was a cloudy day, dismal kind of spring day on the Oregon coast. And it felt like the top of my head opened up, but it also felt like I was driving a Volkswagen Bug, so I'm driving down the road. You don't drive like this, but I was driving down the road in my Volkswagen Bug, and it felt like, and there wasn't a sunroof, it's just a solid roof, but it felt like the roof opened up and golden light flooded in through the roof right into the top of my head. And I had to pull off the side of the road and go, what the hell is going on? And pulled off, stopped, and for the next couple minutes, had a whole bunch of information that's the only way I can describe it. There was a bunch of information downloaded directly into my mind that had to do with plans for an engine, which would use, I didn't know, and at that point I didn't know anything about quantum physics, but now I understand that it would use the the energy that's in the quantum, what Joe Dispenza calls the quantum field.
Mhm.
But it would use, it's called the 0 point field, or the quantum flux field. But it would use energy that is at this point untapped to produce, the engine would convert that energy into propulsion, but not propulsion like an internal combustion engine or a rocket engine. It would be propulsion that would be using, the only way I can think of it is using a vacuum, opening a vacuum in the quantum flux field. And we can talk about the quantum flux field in a minute because it's a real thing. And actually pulls the engine forward rather than pushing it. And that's really all I can. There are some things about it that I don't know yet. And we know that if we set a goal, it has to be, we have to not know how to get there. So it's frightening, and it has to be exciting. And I didn't know that information back when I was 22 years old, but it still makes me feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a long time ago. And Angie's probably told you, don't make any decisions when you're in a state of fear or panic like people are right now. Don't make any decisions in that state, and don't worry about the how. Only about the goal.
Yeah.
And so there is, and actually I have now parts fabricated for this, and I haven't moved on. I've started putting things together, but I lost control of one of the pieces and it literally exploded.
Oh, yeah. When you say that, it's real. When things explode.
I mean, I have a little bag with all the pieces in it. But the idea is, and you don't do work on goal statements like I'm so happy and grateful now that, or do you?
Yep, absolutely.
Everybody does it. Tommy knows it. I know Tommy knows it. So
everyone does.
if I were to say the goal part of the statement, it is, I'm so happy and grateful now that I have created a perfectly operational magnetic resonance frequency propulsion engine that makes the existing model of fuel-based transportation on the planet obsolete.
Nice. Yay.
I've said it a lot of times. But it's an exciting concept. I have some physical things that, I have the parts, but they aren't all put together because the how is still a puzzle to me. I mean, how they all go together. I know what it looks like when it's done, but getting it kind of back engineered, how the pieces are supposed to go together and the sequence they go in is the puzzle right now.
So I remember one time when you and I were talking, and it was right when you were getting ready you were almost done with your book, because you really felt like part of the puzzle for you was writing this book.
Which came to me at Matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to understand, what does the book have to do with this idea? And then the subject of the book was super intriguing to me, because I was like, what? And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I want you to know. Yeah, go ahead.
What you want me to know, or you want them to know?
I want them to know, because
you want them to know what?
I want them to know, why did you think the book was important to write in order to bring this technology forward that you're working on?
Well, I didn't have any idea why at that point, but I knew I needed to do it because it was one of those things that's an overwhelming experience, and caused my brain to start working really fast, and I was writing things down at Matrix while Bob's talking. I'm looking like I'm taking notes, but I'm writing something totally different. I wasn't paying one bit of attention. That's not true. There was some part of me that was paying attention,
Yeah.
but not the part that was writing. But the book ties together physics, the laws of physics, with the spiritual laws, the law of attraction, the law of reciprocity, the law of cause and effect, and all the 7 laws that we've learned about. Ties together the fundamental laws of physics with the 7 spiritual laws of the universe, and connects those 2 with the teachings of Jesus, who was a master personal development coach.
Mm-hmm.
He taught people all things are possible. As a man thinketh, so is he. That was Solomon actually that said that. But the same spiritual laws that are being taught today by personal development coaches were being taught by Jesus 2,000 years ago.
Oh, yep.
He was trying to describe the spiritual laws of the universe in a time when the wheel had only been invented a couple thousand years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't have iron hadn't been invented yet, hadn't been discovered. People were plowing the ground with sticks. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to describe the spiritual laws of the universe to these people. So he had to speak in terms that they could understand. The sower went out into the field to sow. And it's interesting, as a little aside, that process of the sower going out in the field to sow, that process of throwing the seeds out is called broadcasting.
Interesting, right?
And even today, we talk about broadcasting into the field.
Yep.
We're talking about a different kind of broadcasting and an energy into the quantum field, but it's all the same thing.
I remember what struck me that you said was, we don't understand forgiveness. And you related it to science. And that was fascinating to me, because I grew up one side understanding religion and then listening to you talk about it from more of a science and importance of forgiveness. Can you talk about that?
Wow, that I don't know if I can bring that up. I had my mind set on quantum physics.
Okay, but to me, that is what it is to me.
Yeah, well, it's all the same thing.
It's all the same.
But I think basically, to me, forgiveness is one of those things that happens. In order for forgiveness to get into a place where forgiveness takes place, you have to recognize that there's been some transgression, some fault, somebody. It's either somebody has hurt your feelings or ripped you off, or you have taken a path that has taken you off into the swamp someplace instead of on the road toward your goal. And the whole idea of forgiveness, and we've heard a lot of people talk about forgiveness, but forgiveness is really just letting go. And it's accepting things the way they are, and not living in a situation that's imaginary.
Ooh, I like that.
And it's sort of like when they talk about assuming, we just heard Mary Morrissey talking about assuming this morning. And when you assume something, you are in your mind making something real that you have no evidence for.
Right.
And when Neville talks about, Matt and I read The Power of Awareness together, when Neville talks about setting a goal, he said the most important thing is that you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. You accept it as real without any evidence. And that's powerful. And that's one of the things that all religions and all personal development coaches, it doesn't matter if it's Tony Robbins or Bob Proctor or Joe Dispenza or whoever it happens to be, they all say the same thing.
Mhm.
You have to assume that the goal that you have in mind has already happened. You have to become your future self, yourself after the goal's been achieved. And then you live with that, you live and you breathe that assumption.
So can I jump in here for a minute? I wanted
see
to
that?
ask.
I just want to ask this one question because we're right there at the crest, at the precipice. If people are living at a point of unforgiveness, what does that do to their ability to create and step into the quantum field?
Well, the best way, I always like to think of water for some reason. You've all been out and watered the garden from the hose. And you're pulling on the hose and you're watering the garden, you're pulling on the hose, and all of a sudden the hose, it stops squirting water. You know, what's going on? And you look back and it's always the same thing. There's a kink in the hose. And you go back and you undo the kink and the water flows fine. And to me, that's all it is. There's a kink in the hose and you need to undo the kink to get the water to flow.
So once the water is flowing, it gives you all kinds of opportunities, all kinds
It's life.
It's life. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't grow a garden without water. And they say, you know, the grass is always greener where it's watered.
Mm-hmm. Where it's cared for.
Yeah, not
So
on the other side of the fence, unless the other side of the fence is getting more water than you're putting on your side of the fence. The grass is greener.
When we have a hard time with forgiveness, we're not taking care, we're holding on to energy that does not allow us to go into many, many areas of our life because the kink is going to stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as long as the kink's there, you don't have any flow.
Right.
Doesn't matter what else you do.
So Dan, I'm listening to this through what you just explained about quantum entanglement. And when you separate those electrons and just the intention of changing the direction of one will change that.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to this idea that you just talked about of assumption and assuming the wish? Like, what is that? Is there a relation with that?
Well, there has to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything's related. The way I would see it, just off the top of my head, because I haven't really thought about it much, is that our intention goes out before us. Your intention, if your intention is a thought, once the thought is in your mind and it goes out into the field, it travels instantaneously. And so what seems to be the case where if you wanted to, there's another thing called the observer effect in quantum physics, where if an observer is looking for something, you're looking for a positron, and you're concentrating on it, the positron will more than likely appear. Not because it's just a random event, but because you've intended it. And so it has it has an easier pathway. Things flow along the easiest path. It's got a nice, easy pathway because the path has already been opened up by the intention. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
I'm writing it down.
It does. So, I mean, what that tells me, what that means to me is that our intention, our thought, looking at it from assuming the wish fulfilled, or what does that statement say?
Yeah, the focus on, to put your attention on, or assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Yeah. So Angie always talks about, when you set your goal, live from there, live from the end result. That's the picture that you paint in your mind. So I guess when you relate it to quantum entanglement and all the other things that you talked about, I guess how important is, it's obviously really important, because you can't, it seems to me like you won't be able to get there unless you have that intention.
That's true. Yeah. And back in the, if you use a Bible reference, many places in the New Testament, not in the New Testament, many places in the four Gospels, Jesus said, you have to have faith and belief.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was studying that when I was writing the book, I thought, well, I always thought those were kind of the same thing. But he says it so many times that you have to have both of them, that it was obvious he was telling us that faith and belief are two different things. And we use both of those in a lot of different ways.
Interchangeably, yeah.
But what I realized was that if we look at our relationship with God, the universe, Allah, however you describe it, with infinite intelligence, faith is the conviction that infinite intelligence is able to do what you desire. If you're asking for something, whether you're praying for help or you're setting a goal, that the universe is like your best friend. I always thought the universe was like something that's out there, sort of a third party that doesn't really, that's kind of like the ocean. If you just watch out, because the ocean, don't turn your back on the ocean. But the universe, not the universe, but infinite intelligence, God, is our best friend. And if you think, how would I relate that to, how would I relate myself to my best friend? Well, I could tell my best friend anything and not fear judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I could ask for something that I needed, and if my best friend had it, it would be shared with me. Well, here we have an infinite source of energy, an infinite source of knowledge, an infinite source of love that's our best friend, and we can ask for anything, knowing that it doesn't matter what we ask for, it's not going to make any difference to infinite intelligence, because it's infinite. What we're asking for is, like, if somebody came up and asked me for a penny, it would be, well, of course I can give somebody a penny.
Mm-hmm.
And it's way,
not if you're in Canada, you may not have any
on that. But I think of faith as the conviction that God is able to give us what we ask.
Mm-hmm.
And belief is the conviction that we already have it. And I think that's those two would really go together well. That the supply is limitless. So of course we can ask for whatever we want. And the future and the past and the present are all one. That's another thing we talked about earlier. Matt and I talked about that time as we think of it is not, in our everyday experience, we think of time as being linear. You start as a baby, you end as an old person. and we see ourselves along this line that goes from birth to death. But that's a very limited, extremely limited understanding of what time is. Time is not linear. Part of it's linear,
Right.
but time is multidimensional, and it turns out that time, the present and the past and the future, are all the same. And time, that's part of quantum physics, is that time becomes an important part of what they call, sometimes Star Trek people call, the space-time continuum, but it's more of a time-space continuum. That time is the thing that determines space, not the other way around. That's another topic.
I'm trying to wrap my head. Okay, go ahead, Anne.
Is that why then the particles that are in whatever space that move in the entanglement, because there's no real sense of time, it's not linear in this case, that's why they move, because the intention is without the time. It's just happening.
Yeah, it's not that there's no time, but it's that time is time. The dimensions of time are different than we think of them in our everyday experience.
Right.
But you're exactly right that time is defined differently on the quantum scale than it is, and it's not even on the three-dimensional scale. It's according to our senses.
Right.
According to our senses, we feel that time is one thing. Really, that's not the case at all.
Yeah, this is so fascinating.
That's
Thank
really
you.
a good comment.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So my thought is that in the idea of when you were talking about belief and faith and how they are different, would you say, because I look at more of a belief as almost you're receiving, you're allowing, or you're receiving the idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Is that me?
I don't know. So I look at the idea of receiving. If the idea is there, if you have the thought of it there, it's entangled already, like it's already entangled.
You can't unthink it.
Thank you. So what causes it to not come to you then?
It's the kink in the hose.
Another thought.
Well, it can be another thought. You can have your other thoughts that come in and take precedence when you're supposed to be staying focused on the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Or a kink in the hose, where you have energy that you're storing that is distorting it.
Yeah.
Yep. So sometimes when things aren't coming to us, they're not coming. It's not that they're not coming to us, and we have a belief. And we all of a sudden we start making stories. I'm unworthy of it. It's all of a sudden we start making up. We go to MSU. We make shit up.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And none of it has any basis in reality. It's just thought.
It's just thought.
Yeah.
So how, if you were to, if you were somebody who was struggling and you've been somebody who looks at this as rainbow hearts and unicorn farts, that's sometimes when people are thinking about this, they're looking at it and they're thinking, because that's sort of, to be honest, growing up in religion, it was very, very real to me. But when I tried to explain it to people that were more science, it was really odd. And you were probably the first person that I could sort of talk, and we were talking on the same language, but yet like it impacted me so much, because what you were seeking was what I was seeking, but we were seeking it from different angles, but yet the same thing. We were using different language. And yet, even though I don't know quantum physics, I mean, for goodness sake, that is not, but yet when we were talking, I could totally understand what you were talking about. And I could totally uh, buy into the ideas because I had never thought at it from a science point of view,
Mm-hmm.
where it had rules, and that natural laws were really God's modus operandi. And I
Yeah.
started seeing that those rules that I used in my life on a religious standpoint were the same rules you were using in the science world, and that the way you described it was the way I was trying to get there. And there were things that I talked about on this side that made sense to you a little bit better. That was so amazing to me, that we could come from different parts and yet we were talking about the same, very similar things.
Because we really are talking about the same thing.
Yeah, we really are. It was
just with a different points of reference.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing though, because since meeting you, Dan, and talking with you and having you explain this to us, a lot of the stuff that Angie and I grew up with there was no explanation behind it. It was just the idea of this is the way it is. And, you have to either accept that or you're going to hell.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because the most of the rules that are associated with any religion are made up by people that don't understand.
So Tommy is asking a really great question. So I'm just gonna, Tommy, do you want to come on and say it, or do you want me to read it?
Sure.
Okay.
Hey, wow, this is amazing. So thank you, first of all.
What a good-looking guy! Look at that.
Totally, super handsome.
So here's my question then. So is instant manifestation possible then? And if so, why don't we see more of it? Or do we see it all the time? We just don't categorize it as that.
I think it's a little bit of both, because there's no reason why any manifestation can't take place instantly. Most of the reason I think it doesn't is because of doubt.
Yeah.
Doubt, unworthiness, fear. Those are all on that same side of that scale. The fear and faith scales with the stick person in between them. And I think that we are the thing. We're the ones that are producing the kink in the hose.
Yeah.
And what was the other part of the question?
I think you answered it. I want to ask this real quick as a follow-up to that. So Bob always says, no one knows talking about the law of gestation or the law of gender.
That's where I was going.
No one always knows. We don't know the gestation period for the seed, the seed that's called the idea. We don't know that gestation period, and it takes all different kinds of ranges of time for something to happen.
Yeah, tell me about it. How far is it from 1971 to today?
Right. So is that just because we have more or lesser degrees of contradictory thought, and that's the only gestation period we're talking about? If it wasn't for a contradiction, would there be zero gestation period?
Well, it's sort of like the focusing on the candle exercise. Mm-hmm. You can't, a normal person can't focus on a candle with a completely clear mind, no thoughts at all, for more than about 10 seconds.
Right.
And I think that we're sort of like, if you get a dog in the chicken coop, they don't know which one to go after.
Yep.
And we get easily distracted.
Yeah. So if we were somehow able to have like a pure flow of completely undistracted thought for however long, things could happen just like within the blink of a few seconds or something.
Yeah, and I think the other key parts, because all of the people from Jesus on have all said, you have to have the faith and belief. Know that the universe, that infinite intelligence has all the reserves that you could ever want. Two, that what you're asking for has already come into being because you've thought of it. And the third one is just focusing on the feeling of the good feelings you'll have, the elevated emotions that you'll have after you've achieved your goal.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have those things in place, there should be no limit to how fast it can happen.
So it's just how
we try to limit we try to limit it the other way.
Yeah.
So how long is it going to take?
Oh, so interesting.
And there was one little comment I wanted to make, because I don't want to make it sound like quantum physics is something that's totally like one, not understandable, not applicable, or those kinds of things. But we are surrounded by the results of quantum physics everywhere in our life. One of the most common is when you walk into a grocery store or a Walmart or something, and if you look up at the lights, all of those fluorescent lights only work because of quantum physics. The way fluorescent bulbs work was described. It was one of the very first things they discovered in quantum physics, was the idea of fluorescence. And fluorescence takes place because, and it literally is application of quantum, because electrons move from one point to another point around the atom, and when they drop back, they give off light. And depending on the material, it'll give off exactly the same material will give off exactly the same light. Every atom will give off the same exact light, because of the energy that's lost when those electrons drop from one point to another. And that process of giving off light as energy is lost, it's converted from, it's not lost, but it's converted from one level of energy to another. That amount of energy, the light that's given off, is called a quanta. And fluorescence is the result of quantum physics. It's not a quantum leap, which would be going from a lower orbit, they call it, to a higher orbit, higher energy level. But when the electron falls back, the energy is released as light. And the other is the sun. The sun is a vast supply of quantum energy, converting energy of one kind into light energy. And most of the energy conversion comes from the fusion of hydrogen into helium. And when that hydrogen is converted into helium, a little teeny bit of mass is lost every time that conversion takes place. And that mass is converted into pure energy. And all of the light we get around us is because of quantum interactions in the atoms of the sun.
So when you start the ability to pay attention to the multiple ways of doing things, because I think one of the things we do is we get so locked into one way of doing things that's where we don't understand that there's so much more that's available to us. And that's where the faith that there's so much more available to us and the belief come in, where you can take it from all different kinds of places and it'll come, and you can gather evidence of it doing it, and you can get much, much faster at doing it each time you do it.
And you start seeing, when you start on that path, you start seeing what are called synchronicities. You start seeing coincidences that you can't explain, or you were thinking of something and all of a sudden it appears in front of you. On my vision board, I have there's a car called a Lamborghini Urus. It's a Lamborghini SUV, really cool car. And I have a picture of it on my vision board, bright yellow. And I thought, well, it's a cool picture. I'm never going to see one, but I was with my business partner in Nashville, of all places, last fall, and we're walking down the main street where all the music is, and got into a kind of a gravel section, and parked in the gravel on the side of the road is a bright yellow Lamborghini Urus. And I thought, what's the chance?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't chance. It's like the universe was speaking to me. He said, look at this.
It is here.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Reem was on here. She had to jump off, but Reem was,
Burroughs?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Reem was doing an exercise with a group of people that she and I were working with, and she put up a picture of lemons and had one lemon cut, and she asked us to close our eyes. And she said, I want you to take a lemon, and then I want you to, so everybody close your eyes for a minute. And so she said, I want you to take that lemon and cut it in half, and then I want you to cut it in half again. So now we're in quarters, and I want you to take that and cut that quarter in half. And she said, now, I forgot to have you peel it. You're supposed to peel it first and then cut it. And then she said, now I want you to take that quarter of a piece, and I want you to put a piece of it, put some salt on it. And now I want you to put it in your mouth, and I want you to chew it.
Oh.
Keep chewing it. Okay, how many of you can open your eyes. How many of you, your glands are salivating? Yeah. That is just thought energy. That is what thought energy can do. That's pretty powerful, because you could hold that thought for a very short period of time, because you've already experienced the energy of a lemon. What's interesting is that you can take an idea that you have, just like what Dan's saying, and you can start thinking that thought, and you can create a cause and effect just by your thought. That's pretty powerful when you think about that. So if we can do that with just a lemon in our imagination, imagine what you can do when you send out your goal, or you send out what you want, and you begin to develop a faith and a belief, and you gather evidence of it. The faster you begin to gather evidence of it, the quicker it will appear.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that gets the kink into it is your thought.
Mm-hmm. That's really good.
So, Dan, if we
Yes.
were somebody that wanted to learn to practice more quantum entanglement or quantum physics, what kind of exercises could you give us to gather evidence that this is a practice we want to do?
Well, I would say to do. There are some exercises that I've found helpful,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is the "I'm so happy and grateful now that" is the gratitude exercise.
Mm-hmm.
With your not the gratitude exercise. I'll get to that in a second, but the writing down your goal, and writing it down in detail, and writing it down at least once a day, and going and have your goal card and have it in your pocket and look at it. And every time you look at it, not just read it, but think of the feeling that you have after you've fulfilled that goal. And the other is the gratitude exercise, because gratitude opens the door to the flow of energy from infinite intelligence to us, because infinite intelligence is love and gratitude.
Yep.
And by getting into alignment, opening your heart to that feeling, you are becoming one with infinite intelligence.
Because that's how we were created to be.
Yeah, it says, in Genesis says God created man in his own image.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that God looks like us. That means there's something in us that's like God, because we were created in God's image. And we can express gratitude, we can express love, we have the power to forgive. Those are divine properties, divine qualities of our nature that are godlike. We are creators.
There is a song out that it got shared to me. It's by Hillsong, but it's called "So Will I." And I just want to read it to you really quickly. Tommy, one day I know I'm going to sing this, but it said, God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time, with no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made, every burning star, a single fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. God of promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
No syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath. We're made in that image. As we speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. I see your heart in everything you say, every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will I. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the ocean roars your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times.
Mm.
And then one of the things it says, and as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. I love that. Where you lost your life, so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I love that. Things that we've had failures with or things that are dead to us, we need to walk out of it and go into the light of what it is we want. I see your heart in everything you've done, every part designed in work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I. Every precious one, a child you died to save, if you gave your life to love, then so will I. Mm-hmm. But what measures could amount, like you would again 100 billion times, but what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you have, you're given infinite power to create and do that. And the only thing is that sometimes we get off track because of our thought, our quantum ability to think of all different ways of doing it. And we get stuck in one way. And
usually it's the worst possible.
It's the lowest energy, the lowest frequency.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that is what helped me when you helped me understand the difference between frequency, vibration, and energy. When I began to see the difference between those, then I began to see frequency, I began to see vibration, and I began to see energy move. So all of that is how you can look at towards your goal. And you've got to start by just the very thing of a belief that it can happen and walk into the idea that you are entangled with the idea that you can get entangled in something and see it move toward you. You can build a faith and a belief about that and gather evidence of it.
There was one other thought for me is the morning gratitude exercise.
Yep.
I would assume everybody, and I shouldn't be assuming, but assume that everybody does that. And one thing that I've found kind of an addition to that is to follow through in the evening, because I always felt a little bit empty in the evening, to go back over the day, and I put down what went well, and just put down
I
3 or 5 little thoughts. I put a little www, which doesn't mean World Wide Web. It means what went well. And I think, okay, coffee in the morning went well. It can be something simple. It could be something like, I made the right choice. Then I follow that up with a WNW, which means what needed work. And if I had a problem with patience, I might put down patience. I try to keep it positive. If I got angry, I might put down clarity or something like that. And then I put, and then I write down see, I'm going to forget it here. What went well, what needed work, and I finish that off with how I will awaken. I awake. How am I going to awaken? I awaken rested, focused, whatever it happens to be. How do you want to wake up in the morning? I want to be clear. I want to be. I want to have my heart open, open for possibilities. And then I finish that off because I'm in bed writing this, and I put a little cue for a question, and it's a question or as Neville calls it, a demand to the universe. What do I want? What do I want to? Do I want a vision, a sign, abundance in my life? What is it that I want? And it's surprising, if I put down I want a lucid dream, guess what?
Have a lucid dream.
You have a lucid dream. Your subconscious mind takes that information because it's what you want and works on it all night long. And some of them are profound. And some of the things that come, and maybe it won't come for a day or two, but all of a sudden I'll see a little thing walking on the trail and go, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Does anyone have a question? I know you probably have lots. I have a webinar at 7 people, but we can go up until 7. So we've got another 20 minutes. Does anyone have a question or a thought?
I have a question.
And
Go
this
ahead.
is Diana. Hi, Diana.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
This is fantastic. It's a very basic question, but it just came to mind, so I'm going to ask. So you're talking about the exercise of journaling and the gratitude and all of that, and that's fantastic. Thank you. Do you think it matters if we handwrite it or if we type it?
Yes, because typing, handwriting, the studies that have shown the eye-hand coordination and the amount of brain activity that happens when you're handwriting is almost 50 times as great as when you're typing, and even more if you're speaking it or if you're listening to it, like you listen to an audiobook or something like that. You will produce more permanent neural pathways by handwriting, because not only does it take more time, which gives you time to think between every letter. Your brain is still working. It's working, millions of cycles per second. Your brain is working while you're handwriting, and it's thinking ahead of how you're composing that, and that just the time involved. When you're typing, you can almost type without thinking. Mm-hmm. But handwriting is very, very important, I think, for doing that.
So that's a habit I'm going to change. Thank you.
Sometimes I'll handwrite things out if I want to make a recording for myself, like an affirmation or a meditation recording. I'll handwrite it all out and then read it off and record it.
So writing is most powerful, and then recording and listening is less powerful?
Recording and listening is less powerful, because your mind can still wander, and when it's wandering, you're not listening. Mm-hmm. You're not listening. You totally miss. I'll listen to the same recording twice, and I didn't hear that the first time. Well, it's because I was probably thinking about whether I need to get tire changed or and my brain, it isn't going through my conscious mind, so I'm not remembering it.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, even if you're writing cursive. I remember Bob talking about this. It does give your mind more time to think, and there is more of a mind-body connection when you're writing cursively, even.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Mhm.
And even more if you write left-handed or with your non-dominant hand.
I do have a follow-up, if that's okay.
Mhm.
So I tend to write out a life script, a power life script, and it's pretty long. So I'm thinking that would, and I mean, not that it's an issue, but is that something that you can write once a week and then listen to it, or is it really most beneficial to just write it out every single time?
No, you could write it once. I think when Peggy McCall talks about it, she'll write a life script that's 20 minutes long,
Right.
but she'll only write it, once in a
Once in a
while,
time.
and then she'll update it. And I'm sure she
Okay.
keeps part of it the same, and she thinks, oh, I really should have said something about the towels in the bathroom. And so she'll add that.
Okay,
The
great.
other,
Thank you so much.
the other thing too about, I think the point of repetition is what's important.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get that feeling, and even if, I think what's really good about the life script is that you get all of the feelings involved. It gets you into a feeling state of it. And for me, I would read my life script every day. I would read it. I didn't have it recorded, but I would read it. But I would live in the feeling of it. I would stop and I would live, and I would see myself like with my closets, and I would see myself with, the car, or I'd see myself traveling, or I would see myself with all kinds of things. And just by thinking about that, the symbol of it drew it to me. I
Yeah.
had a faith and a belief about it until one day, because I lived in it so much, it's almost anticlimactic when it shows up, because it shows up before you even know it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I hit the goal like 3 days ago. That's happened to me many times because I live in the idea of it so much. It's so real that I have brought pieces of it, quantum pieces of it, to me to form it. I don't know if that's the right verbiage that I used right there, but I brought in micro pieces of it to myself to form the whole picture.
Yeah, and Diana, you might try, if you're thinking about doing recordings. I one that was helpful for me was I wrote out a fairly long couple pages of I am statements, the kind of person that I want to be, and I left, when I did the recording, I left enough space that I could listen to the recording of myself and then say it aloud. And it works great in the car if you're by yourself, because people think you're talking to somebody, but I'll hear the recording and it says, I am observant. The recording will say that, and I'll say, I am observant. And then the recording will say, I am something else. I am powerful. And I'll say that. And then you're getting involved. You're not just listening, but you're actively involved in the recording.
Speaking it. You're speaking it.
Great idea. Yeah, because I have recorded my life script and I listened to it, but as you indicated, I go off sometimes. I'm not paying attention sometimes. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much.
And the one thing you'll find is that if your sentences are long, you probably want to shorten your sentences up in the recording, because you'll forget what it was, how the sentence is supposed to go.
Good tip. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons that I like to read and listen. So many times I'll get a book and I'll get the recording and I'll follow along with it. And sometimes I read it out loud. I will do it by repetition over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's good. And you really get into the mind of the author when you do that.
You do. You totally do. And I can memorize on the page the feeling of it. I might not know the exact sentence, but I know it's on this page and I can almost feel where it's at. And then I'll go, here's where it's at. That's why I have a hard time when I get something digitally, because I can't find it on my iPad. It's not, I can't, it doesn't come. But yeah. Well, Dan, this was just an absolute pleasure. I'm
so glad. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you connected with us, because it was one of the highlights, and I had people talk about it forever. And my group has changed quite a bit. We've grown quite a bit. So
I can see there are a lot of people here.
This is not even a third.
Wow.
Yeah, so lots has been happening. So
well, we'll have to do it again. We can pick another topic.
We do. What would be a good topic you would want to know?
You know what? There are an infinite number.
That's right.
We could talk about energy and frequency and vibration. I've got it. Actually, I have a whole PowerPoint lecture on that. So
who would like to do that next week on Tuesday at the same time?
Awesome. That would be
Should
great.
we commit you?
Yeah, we could talk about energy, frequency, and vibration.
At the same time next week?
We'll have Tommy. Tommy's a light and sound guy. He knows all about energy, frequency, and vibration.
Yeah.
We'll have him talk.
Sounds good.
Do you want to meet back here next week? Will it be a date?
Oh my God, yeah.
Tommy and I can exchange what we know about how waves travel and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Well,
Tommy,
I'm marking it
Tommy,
down.
look
then.
up. You know the relationship between wavelength and energy for light, right?
Like in terms of color?
Yeah, the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy.
Oh, didn't know about that part.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's a whole nother physics lesson.
Oh,
But
wow.
look up the Planck, P-L-A-N. They call it Planck, but it's not really Planck. It's Planck. He was Max Planck. He was a German physicist who was instrumental in the beginning of quantum physics. But look, and there's a fundamental unit of length called the Planck length. Look that up, and if you plug it into the equation for energy, where energy equals h nu over lambda, it's the frequency and energy equation for waves. Oh, you can look that up too. And you plug in the Planck length. It's amazing. That's the wavelength of the waves in the quantum field, and the amount of energy that they carry is huge. Huge, like unimaginably huge. And you just put it into the mathematics, and the math is right.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put the Planck length in there, you go, holy crap.
Wow.
When I first did it, it kind of made me have shivers. It was like, that doesn't seem possible.
Wow.
That's so good. Okay, well, Dan, I'm committing you to next week at this time.
Next week, 5:30.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
So love to you. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.